Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki.
Right. Canto 2, Chapter 10, verse 22. Chapter entitled Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 22. By development of the desire of the great sages to know the ears, the power of hearing and controlling deity of hearing, and the objects of hearing became manifested. The great sages desire to hear about the self. Purport. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, by advancement of knowledge, one should try to know about the Supreme Lord, the Son and Bottom of everything. Knowledge does not mean knowledge only of the laws of nature or physical knowledge, which are working by the direction of the Lord. The scientists are eager to hear about the physical laws working in material nature. They are eager to hear through the medium of radio and television about things taking place far away from them on other planets. But they should know that the power of hearing and the instruments for hearing were given to them by the Lord for hearing about the self, or about the Lord. Unfortunately, the power of hearing is misused in hearing the vibrations of mundane affairs. The great sages were interested in hearing about the Lord through Vedic knowledge and nothing more. That is the beginning of all reception of knowledge.
So it seems that if you consider yourself a sadhu or a sage, then you're just interested in really hearing about the Lord, hearing about Krishna. Otherwise, we can be interested to hear so many different things, but I guess the question is, will that satisfy us? Any thoughts?
Agree.
Okay. So that section was the desire to hear, and then the ears, and the controlling deity of hearing. Would have been nice to know who the controlling deity of hearing is. Usually sound is in ether. So we know that, aroma was in vayu, in the air, but sound is in ether. Who's the controlling deity of ether? Okay. When there was a desire to perceive the physical characteristics of matter, such as softness, hardness, warmth, cold, lightness, and heaviness, the background of sensation, the skin pores, the hairs on the body, and their controlling deities, the trees, were generated. Within and outside the skin is a covering of air through which sense perception became prominent. Purport. The physical characteristics of matter, such as softness, are subjects of sense perception, and thus physical knowledge is the subject matter of the touch sensation. One can measure the temperature of matter by touching with the hand, and one can measure the weight of an object by lifting it with the hand, and thus estimate its heaviness or lightness. The skin pores, and the hairs on the body are all interdependent with the touch sensation. The air blowing within and outside the skin is also an object of sense perception. This sense perception is also a source of knowledge, and therefore it is suggested here that physical or physiological knowledge is subordinate to the knowledge of the self, as above mentioned. Knowledge of self can expand to the knowledge of phenomena, but physical knowledge cannot lead to knowledge of the self. There is, however, an intimate relation between the hairs on the body and the vegetation on the body of the earth. The vegetables are nourishment for the skin, both as food and medicine, as stated in the third canto, Twacham asya venir binam vivishur dishnyam osadi. Interesting. So, let's see. So I looked that verse up, and it says that when there was a separate manifestation of skin, so this is actually from the 3rd canto, chapter 6, text 18. When there was a separate manifestation of skin, the controlling deities of sensation in their different parts entered into it, and thus the living entities feel itching and happiness due to touch. For sense perception, there are 2 principal items, touching and itching, and both of them are controlled by the skin and hairs on the body. According to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the controlling deity of touch is the air passing within the body, and the controlling deity of the hairs on the body is Oshadya. For the skin, the object of perception is touch, and for the hairs on the body, the object of perception is itching. So I don't know if that really gave us much information, but it seems that vegetation and earth are nourishment for the skin. So this is good. So you can eat vegetables and it's good for your skin, I guess, like that. Also, then touch in the sense objects and the deity of the skin, the trees. Again, all this really warrants quite a lot of deeper investigation, which I'm sure all the answers and understanding is found there in the Bhagavatam or other Vedic literatures. Just need to look into it. Controlling deity of hairs on the body is the trees, and that's connected through the fact that I guess vegetables are good for the skin. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's true. Vegetables are good. Got fibre.
Fiber's good for the skin?
Yeah, because it cleans everything out.
Oh, okay.
It's clean inside, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
Right, text 24. Thereafter, when the Supreme Person desired to perform varieties of work, the 2 hands and their controlling strength, and Indra, the demigod in heaven, became manifested, as also the axe, dependent on both the hands and the demigod. Purport. In every item we can note with profit that the sense organs of the living entity are never independent at any stage. The Lord is known as the Lord of the senses, Rishikesha. Thus, the sense organs of the living entities are manifested by the will of the Lord, and each organ is controlled by a certain type of demigod. No one therefore can claim any proprietorship of the senses. The living entity is controlled by the senses are controlled by the demigods, and the demigods are the servants of the Supreme Lord. That is the arrangement in the system of creation. The whole thing is controlled ultimately by the Supreme Lord. And there is no independence either of the material nature or of the living entity. The illusion living entity who claims to be the Lord of his senses is under the clutches of the external energy of the Lord. As long as a living entity continues to be puffed up by his tiny existence, he is to be understood to be under the stringent control of the external energy of the Lord, and there is no question of liberation from the clutches of illusion, Maya, however much one may declare himself a liberated soul.
Any thoughts? Silence is golden. So it seems that all the senses are under the control of different deities, as we've been mentioning. But those deities are under the control of Lord. Yeah, God, Krishna. So ultimately, none of us are really the proprietors or the controller of even our senses, but we're all actually ultimately controlled by the Lord. Because the senses are controlled by the deities that control the senses, and they are controlled by God, by Krishna. Important point. Also, another point is that that after the Gyan Indriyas, so the Gyan Indriyas are the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the ears, and the skin. They acquire knowledge. They're knowledge-acquiring senses. So after the Gyan Indriyas, the knowledge-acquiring senses were created, then it's described that actually the karma indriyas, the karma indriyas meaning senses, and karma means the working senses, or those senses that, perform activities. And so those start with the hands. So you would have the hands, or the arms, and the legs, the tongue, again, because the tongue not only acquires knowledge through taste, but it is an action sense because it produces sound. My sidekick here is a little slow today. So, and then the last two are ones that we don't usually like to talk about, but you have the rectum for evacuation and the genitals for creation. Like that. Okay, so I guess now we're going to be speaking about the karma indriyas, as we've already spoken about, all the gyan indriyas. Okay, text 25. Thereupon, because of his desiring to control movement, his legs became manifested, and from the legs the controlling deity named Vishnu was generated. By his personal supervision of this act, all varieties of human being are busily engaged in dutiful occupational sacrifice. So there you go. So the next of the karma indriya is the legs. Purport. Long purport. Every human being is engaged in his particular occupational duty, and such activities are visible as men go hither and thither. This is very prominently visible in big cities of the world. People are going all over the cities with great concern from one place to another. This movement is not limited only to the cities, but is also visible outside the cities, from one place to another, and from one city to another, by different means of vehicles. Men are moving by cars and rails on the roads, by subways within the earth, and by planes in the sky, for the purpose of business success. But in all these movements, the real purpose is to earn wealth for comfortable life. For this comfortable life, the scientist is engaged, the artist is engaged, the engineer is engaged, the technician is engaged, all in different branches of human activity. But they do not know how to make the activities purposeful to fulfill the mission of human life. Because they do not know this secret, all their activities are targeted towards the goal of sense gratification without control, and therefore, by all this business, they are unknowingly entering into the deep regions of darkness.
Because they have been captivated by the external energy of the Supreme Lord, they have completely forgotten the Supreme Lord Vishnu, and thus they have taken it for granted that this life as presently manifested under the conditions of material nature is all in all for enjoying the highest amount of sense gratification. But such a wrong conception of life cannot give anyone the desired peace of mind, and thus, in spite of all advancement in knowledge by use of the resources of nature, no one is happy in this material civilization. The secret is that at every step they should try to execute sacrifices toward the path of world peace. The Bhagavad Gita 18:45-46 also advises the same secret in the following verses. The Lord said to Arjuna, "Just hear from me how one can attain the highest perfection in life simply by discharging his specified occupational duty. Man can attain the highest perfection of life by worshipping the Supreme Lord and by performing sacrifice for the sake of the Supreme Lord Vishnu, who is all-pervading, and by whose control every living being acquires his desired facilities according to his personal propensity."
There is no harm in having different propensities in life, because every human being is proportionately independent to chalk out the plan of his life by different occupations. But one should make it a point in his life to know perfectly well that he is not independent absolutely. One is certainly under the control of the Supreme Lord and under different agencies. Knowing this, one should make it a point that by his work and the result of his labor, he serves the Supreme Lord as prescribed by the authorities, expert in the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. For performing such occupational duties of life, the leg is the most important instrument of the body, because without the help of the legs, one cannot move from one place to another. And therefore the Lord has special control over the legs, of all human beings, which are meant for performing yajnas. Some thought?
Interesting.
So it seems the Lord takes a special interest in the legs because the legs are fundamental to movement and moving around. But I like this last paragraph because it really stressed the different propensities in living entities and how that's natural. Because every human being is proportionately independent to chalk out the plan of his life by different occupations. So everyone is proportionately independent to choose his own path, his own direction, his own occupations. But we have to remember that we are, what do you say, not independent absolutely, only proportionately. So, very interesting statement. Okay?
Right, text 26.
Yes, that'll be it.
Therefore, for sexual pleasure...
Thereupon.
Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals, and thus there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati. The object of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Purport. The heavenly pleasure for the conditioned soul is sexual pleasure, and this pleasure is tasted by the genitals. The woman is the object of sexual pleasure, and both the sense perception of sexual pleasure and the woman are controlled by the Prajapati, who is under the control of the Lord's genitals. The impersonalist must know from this verse that the Lord is not impersonal, for he has his genitals on which all the pleasurable objects of sex depend. No one would have taken the trouble to maintain children if there were no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. Ain't that the truth? This material world is created to give the conditioned soul a chance for rejuvenation, for going back home, back to Godhead. And therefore, generation of the living being is necessary for upkeep of the purpose of creation. Sexual pleasure is an impotence for such action, and as such, no one can even serve the Lord in the act of such sexual pleasure. Oh, and such one can serve the Lord. The service is counted when the children born of such sexual pleasure are properly trained in God consciousness. The whole idea of material creation is to revive the dormant God consciousness of the living entity. In forms of life other than the human form, sexual pleasure is prominent without any motive of service for the mission of the Lord. But in the human form of life, the conditioned soul can render service to the Lord by creating progeny suitable for the attainment of salvation. One can beget hundreds of children, enjoy the celestial pleasure of sexual intercourse, provided he is able to train the children in God consciousness.
Not easy.
No, it's not. And it starts with the parents. Very important. Anyway. Otherwise, begetting children is on the level of the swine. Rather, the swine is more expert than a human being, because the swine can beget a dozen piglets at a time. Oh, cute. Whereas a human being can give birth to only one at a time. So one should always remember that the genitals, sexual pleasure, the woman and the offspring are all related in the service of the Lord. And one who forgets this relationship in the service of the Supreme Lord becomes subjected to the threefold miseries of material existence by the laws of nature. Perception of sexual pleasure is there even in the body of the dog, but there is no sense of God consciousness. The human form of life is distinct from that of the dog by the perception of God consciousness.
Thoughts?
Yeah, it's very important if you have dependents to, whether it's kids, spouse, friends, siblings, your circle of influence. I should always try to increase the consciousness, rise it to the top. It's very important. You know, life is not just supposed to be frivolous and temporary. We should always try to how we can serve others in that way, but that means that we have to serve ourselves first and be like of good character and good devotees. Otherwise we can't give out what we don't have.
Yeah, that's for sure. Definitely. I think Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said he would have sex hundreds of times if he could produce children that would be Krishna conscious or God conscious. So he was such an exalted person, and he wasn't sure that he could produce children like that. But the point is that we try. I mean, we may or may not be successful. That ultimately is up to Krishna. But if we endeavor and try our best, then that's the success. Srila Prabhupada didn't necessarily have it. He had how many children? 3, 4? 3 or 4 children, and I don't think any of them really became devotees. So, you know, it's in one sense it's nice to say that it's the parent, but every living entity is their own living entity. They all have their own free will, and you can give all the. What is it? You can cast pearls before swine, and it won't make any difference, you know. So, you know, someone can be given a good education or good moral upbringing or even a devotional upbringing. They could be brought up in the world of bhakti and still just make the decisions that put them in a different place. But it doesn't mean that the parent didn't do their job. So, you know, what can be done? We have to leave ultimately, just like Arjuna fighting in the battle of Kurukshetra. Krishna says, whether you win or lose, that doesn't matter. The point is that you make the endeavor and you do it, you know, trying to bring pleasure to me. That's my thoughts. Anything you'd like to say to conclude?
No, but I do believe the bedrock of the foundation of one's life starts at home. My point in saying that is like, very often people put a lot of pressure on schools and institutions and blame, but it starts at home, I would say.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's for sure.
And that definitely molds you, and cultures, you know, whatever cultures you have, and it's there. That's the point. You can put it out there, but you know, the majority of the time they're in the door, in the house as opposed to outside. So we need to make sure we have and obviously they make their own choices. We see that with devotees we know as well, who are still devotees, friends, but their kids have chosen, now that they're older, teenagers, whatever, they've chosen their own path, but at least they were given that choice and that opportunity. And personally, I think that we see people come round, it's just your eternal credit that you come in consciousness with Krishna, and maybe you're not ready this lifetime, but you'll never lose that, whatever you did. So it's true. Can't guarantee where people go. It's all choice and independence and desire.
But not absolute independence, proportional independence. Okay, so next time we'll pick up with, was it verse 27?
Yes.
All right.
Evacuating of stool.
Oh, great. We'll save the best for last. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Don't forget, Chaitanya Charitamrita sets are available. Now's the time to get it. If you want to worship Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, order a CC set. Let us know. We'll sort it out for you.
Hare Bol.